New York City. At the dawn of the 80s, it was exploding with opportunity.
Boom times. That's what the numbers signal today. An economy that's on a roll in this country.
A place to seek money, power, fame. Amid the glitz and greed, 5 titans seized their moment. But in 1986, we started to learn the very dark secrets behind their success. A striver from Detroit had transformed himself into a titan of Wall Street.
You have to understand that I'm a professional.
But his house of lies was about to collapse.
Ivan knew once Levine started talking that he was dead. He was dead.
A real estate star had seemingly perfected the art of the deal, but could not run his debts for long.
Then we'll talk about that later, I suspect.
The queen of the palace had turned meanness into a winning brand.
I'm a woman, I'm a tough businesswoman.
But her subjects were about to revolt.
She had fired enough people, acted in an imperial way, people were open for blood.
And as Gotham's new hero went after his biggest villains yet,
they did not pay millions of dollars in taxes.
Giuliani has always been out for Giuliani.
The dapper Don looked danger in the face.
Button was pushed, the car blew up.
And laughed.
I know you didn't believe I was guilty,
People asked, did he have a guilty conscience? Guilty schmelty. It was such a sense of every man for himself.
She said, well, you should have kept your pants on. If you kept in your pants, you wouldn't have such problems.
I remember when that news struck, it was like all the air went out of the room. Paranoia ran rampant.
These 5 titans would reshape the city and the world we live in today. And when in 1986, we began to see them for who they really were, it was already too late. A new Gilded Age, defined by opulence and extravagance, was reaching its apex. New York City, all but left for dead less than a decade ago, had been shocked back to life by an explosion of development, culture, and money. It looked like the party would never stop. But looks, as they say, can be deceiving.
Investment banker Dennis Levine has been arrested and charged with insider trading.
Dennis Levine collected $12.5 million in illegal profits. He did it by gaining advance knowledge of 54 pending takeovers.
I realize that I've committed very serious crimes for which I'm very sorry, and it was a very painful lesson to learn.
Rudy Giuliani, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, was the driving force behind his arrest.
He's young and he's incredibly aggressive. And he takes those same techniques that he had used to bring down mafia figures to go after white-collar criminals.
What credit it will do to my reputation, says Rudy to himself.
Was anyone else involved in this at all, knowingly?
Yes, at this point, though, I can't identify anyone else. No one else has been publicly identified.
When the Dennis Levine news broke in the press, the reaction on Wall Street was shocking. One rotten apple. Get rid of them. This is not typical of our industry.
At the time, this information was flowing everywhere. Nobody thought anyone was ever going to get in trouble. It almost became part of the culture.
What Dennis himself had done was bad, but it wasn't cataclysmic. The reason Dennis Levine was cataclysmic was because of what he knew, who he knew.
Ivan Boesky, the man. He became the biggest in his profession.
His meteoric rise to the top of Wall Street was built on lies. And with his web of deceit about to unravel, he would discover that there was no honor amongst thieves.
Ivan Boesky made a lot of money. His assets in 1986 came to about $131 million. He was clearly one of the wealthiest people, had amassed one of the great fortunes in the 80s.
What's the biggest payoff day you have ever had? How much? I'm tacky.
Well, we don't talk numbers.
Ivan Boesky had to have known that he was now in mortal danger. The day Dennis Levine was arrested in 1986, and that news went out, Ivan Boesky came out of a conference room. Someone in the office said, "Hey, look at this. Did you hear this news?" Dennis Levine was arrested. And he said, "Who?" He said, Dennis who? And I said, Dennis Levine. He said, I've never heard of him. Now, Dennis Levine made promises to his collaborators all along that he'd be a, quote, stand-up guy who would never talk.
Dennis Levine turned out to be a chatterbox.
In return for a lighter sentence, he agreed to tell all he knew. And what he knew was dynamite.
Dennis Levine ratted on Ivan Boesky. He should have known that was possible all along. The fact Boesky would associate with Dennis Levine was an example of the deep nature of his greed. It shows how ambitious and blind Ivan was in the pursuit of money.
I really was shocked. When Dennis Levine provided the name of Ivan Boesky, it was clear that this would be even bigger. So we geared up for a lengthy fight, and we launched an investigation of Ivan Boesky with a barrage of subpoenas.
The notion that there were 27 subpoenas made it quite clear that this was a massive investigation.
I thought we were in for a long fight.
I called Ivan Boesky and told him about the subpoenas, and I suggested that we needed to have a face-to-face meeting.
Boesky's lawyers said, look, you're guilty. You've been doing this rampantly. You have no defense. And your only hope is to cooperate and get some lenience. So who can you give up?
People asked, did Ivan Boesky have a guilty conscience? Guilty schmelty. Ivan knew once Levine started talking that he was dead. He was dead. He was such a sense of every man for himself.
Ivan Boesky had very intense drive to climb the social and financial ladder.
He lived in his image.
He wanted to be accepted.
And now he was panicking. This was going to come crashing down on him.
I'm sure he called his lawyer right away. He basically had a lawyer joined at the hip.
Mr. Boesky made the decision to initiate settlement discussions with the SEC.
Ivan Boesky was ready to provide very intriguing information about other people involved in illegal activity.
I mean, this is like John Gotti stuff. You know, Omerta, you shouldn't talk.
This is not the mafia. These people, they're affluent. They don't want to spend the rest of their lives in jail. They are going to start turning on each other. And who could Ivan Boesky offer to help reduce his own sentence? No less than the most important person in American finance.
Junk bond king Michael Milken, the financier who has transformed American corporate finance.
Milken is said to be the most influential money man on Wall Street.
For Giuliani, who was trying to make a point about greed, about Wall Street, about insider trading, Michael Milken was the Holy Grail, the white whale.
New York, 1986. On Wall Street, some unscrupulous moneymen were skating on very thin ice. While further uptown, in a once bustling part of the city, no one was skating at all.
Remember the Wallman skating rink in Central Park? It was supposed to reopen this weekend, finally.
Across from the Plaza Hotel, this icon of New York, in Central Park, there was an ice skating rink. And people loved it. I mean, even if you didn't ice skate there, just looking at it, it was just a wonderful thing in the city in the winter. And the mechanicals failed.
The city kept saying it's going to restore Wallman Rink and failed to, much to the embarrassment of Ed Koch.
People were annoyed, and Donald Trump saw an opportunity.
Trump, from his office, could look down upon the Wallman Rink and, in his brash way, said, I can restore it in a year.
Ed Koch doesn't want Trump touching this thing. He doesn't want anything to do with him. So Donald starts a little campaign that, Koch is trying to deny the people this glorious jewel.
Koch just believed that Donald was a massive bloviator.
The city of New York had that rink closed for almost 7 years. It was a total disaster. You know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. I got fed up watching it, and I offered to build it.
So Koch gives in.
Trump milked the Wallman Rink to the max for his own PR purposes.
It was a victory for Donald Trump, and it was a defeat for Ed Koch.
I give Ed Koch tremendous credit for having the courage to say, Donald, go and do it.
You just saw the modest Donald Trump.
Give him credit. The Koch administration is absolutely paralyzed. They cannot fix Woolman skating rink.
Donald Trump came along and said, I can do this thing in 6 months, and he got it done in 5.
It's been a tremendous success. We opened last weekend. We had the biggest crowds in the history of the rink and in the history of America.
It later came out that he accomplished this feat largely by screwing all the contractors.
Trump, in essence, was going to pay some of the people who were fixing Woolman Rink in attention. He was going to pay them in hype. Once Woolman Rink was fixed, Trump emerged as the king of the hill and did not ultimately share that spotlight.
In reality, what he was asking us to do was to supply the services for the rink and to dispense with any profits or expenses.
How you get things done and come in under budget? I mean, what's the trick?
It's a lot of work, and it's knowledge, and it's a lot of things. It's a whole vast coterie of things, and we'll talk about that later, I suspect.
The developer from Queens had delivered on his promise in his own unique way. A feat that would only burnish his myth in the minds of New Yorkers. But he wasn't the only real estate magnate making news. For years now, his fiercest rival had also been reaping the rewards of an empire built on image.
Harry owns about 200 buildings.
And now she was hard at work on the newest monument to her ego.
I own this, I own this, I own this, and that one.
One that would prove to be her undoing.
Leona Helmsley rules her kingdom like she's the star of her own movie. Her co-star is her husband, Harry, a man of unimaginable wealth and power. Together, they oversee this extravagant property.
When the Helmsleys bought Dunellen, Leona took charge of the renovations, and renovations aplenty.
She loved making it beautiful.
The Helmsleys spent $4 million refurbishing their 28-room estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, including a marble dance floor above one of their 2 pools for $1 million. They installed an expensive indoor-outdoor stereo system and spent thousands more on landscaping, art, and ornaments.
At Dunellen, once she signed a contract with a contractor to do some work, she was always renegotiating downward.
On one deal, she just refused to pay the contractor. The contractor said, please, I have 6 children. And she said, well, you should have kept your pants on. If you kept in your pants, you wouldn't have such problems.
Everyone was afraid of Leona Helmsley because of that reptilian brain she had where she could turn on you in a split second.
I'm a woman, I'm a tough businesswoman. What has that got to do? I'm running a business.
You could think that you were her favorite employee in 1 minute and find yourself out on the street the next minute. One day, she started berating a highly respected member of Harry's management team and told Harry he had to fire him. And Harry said, I'm not going to fire him. He's one of my oldest associates. And that's when she said, if you don't fire him, I'm going to stop having sex with you and move to the apartment in Palm Beach. I thought Harry would never fire him. He's too loyal to him. He wouldn't do it. But Harry came in that day and he fired him. Harry Helmsley was known for being an extremely ethical, honest man. But she changed all of that. She did not care at all about anyone else. She did what she wanted to do, and that was it. And she hurt a lot of people.
There was a period called the Bloodbath, when Leona Helmsley fired 4 of Harry Helmsley's stalwarts that had been in his organization for decades.
Those that were fired either thought they were our partners, underclad, they had their hand in the cookie jar, all right, or they just couldn't cut the mustard.
But Leona Helmsley forgot the most important lesson, which is you keep your friends close and you keep your enemies closer. In December of 1985, a tipster called the New York Post and claimed that he had information on the Helmsleys that would clearly prove that they were defrauding the United States government. in several areas.
She was trying to construe personal expenses as business expenses.
She regarded Dunellen as a place of business, not as a mere residence, so everything had to be charged for Dunellen through the business, of course.
She had no ethics whatsoever. She was a conniver, a schemer. She was always trying to manipulate things. She thought nothing about cheating on taxes.
When the headline came out, Helmsley scam bared, it was a kill. She had fired enough people, acted in an imperial way enough times, people were open for blood.
Former friends and employees lined up to spill the beans on Leona's tyrannical behavior.
She was greedy. She was mean. She was all the things that they wanted to accuse her because she flaunted her success.
They have no right to evade the taxes.
Hang on, man. Hang on, that's what I think.
The people of New York, having once bought into the whole glamorous package, had now viciously turned on their one-time queen. But it was one prominent New Yorker who jeered the loudest of all.
Donald and Leona did not like each other. I think that Donald felt that Leona had tarnished Harry Helmsley's name. He called her a disgrace to humanity, truly evil, sick, a living nightmare.
On Leona Helmsley, I feel sorry for Harry.
So that wasn't too positive.
Let's say I'm a rotten boss. That isn't a crime. That's not a crime. They know I've done nothing criminal.
The same headlines that used to bolster this real estate empire were now being used to tear it down. It was the biggest New York story there was, and it played right into the hands of one very ambitious lawman.
Leona Helmsley, again, another New York figure that people kind of love to hate.
It was a no-lose situation for Giuliani to go after her.
It was just a good move to say, oh, no, look, the rich and powerful will, face consequences.
It is now alleged that they did not pay millions of dollars in taxes that they were required by law to pay.
He was on the side of the angels, and also it was such a larger-than-life tabloid story, then that was kind of a home run for him.
I'm innocent. My only crime is that I'm Leona Helmsley.
The bald, the brave, and the beautiful rummaged through their costume collections and came out tonight for the opening of the Palladium.
By the mid-'80s, New York's nightlife scene had become one of the most exciting in the world, and New Yorkers felt free to explore anything and everything. The city had become a fantasy land.
New York had become known as Fun City. Clubs would put on shows and extravaganzas.
New York was exploding. Everyone was indulging, couldn't get enough.
New York had an attitude, and we just wanted to be part of it.
Is it a success?
I don't know, is it? You tell me. I don't know. I hope so.
There was just sort of like an organic synergy in the city, but it felt very decadent and hedonistic also.
And it wasn't just gay, it wasn't just straight. Everybody was exploring their own identity, and cultures were mixing.
To come, share their stories, that's when we met like-minded souls. Incredible fantasy world come alive.
Print till you drop.
People needed to go out to meet other people, and the main motivation was actually to hook up.
It was complete freedom.
Suzanne Barish became one of the reigning club promoters. She would have a performer at her parties named Lady Hennessy Brown. Her talent was kind of squirting milk out of her breasts at the crowd on cue.
People would come with umbrellas, coffee cups. We did everything. Nobody cared.
You can live this incredible fantasy life till you drop.
New Yorkers were living louder and larger than they had for years. But a terrifying change was in the air.
The lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer.
A story appears in the New York Times that there has been cancer identified in the gay community.
I got a call that a friend of mine named Hibiscus, who was with San Francisco drag troupe, was sick. He died very quickly of horrible, horrible symptoms. They called it the gay cancer.
Many victims get a rare form of cancer called Kaposi's sarcoma.
Others get an infection known as pneumocystis pneumonia. Researchers know of 413 people who have contracted the condition in the past year.
Starting hearing rumors, starting to lose friends or friends of friends.
Guess who else has it? Guess who just died? Then you'd run into an old friend and they looked very thin and had sort of a grayish pallor, and you realized they had it.
AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, is a terrifying and mysterious disease, and it's killing a lot of people.
Almost half the known cases are in New York City.
We didn't know much about what this virus was.
Nobody knew for sure how you got it.
AIDS is baffling. There is no known cure. No one really knows what causes it.
We didn't know if you could get AIDS from kissing someone, from saliva, from sneezing.
There was fear that if you touched someone with AIDS, you could get AIDS.
It created an atmosphere of downright panic.
It was a monster. People didn't go home with each other anymore. That was huge.
Suicides shot through the ceiling in the 80s. AIDS was so horrific that people preferred to take their life.
Sometimes people come in and meet a stranger, and 10 minutes later you see them leaving. That you're not seeing anymore.
Before AIDS, it was like you went and had sex with somebody different every night.
Tonight there's a padlock on the mine shaft.
To the gay men who went to the mine shaft, the whips and chains, the anonymous sex there provided a sexual fantasy land. But reality closed the bar's doors early this morning, and the city hopes the courts will close them for good.
Places where death can be distributed. We don't want that to go on.
This place is not selling death any more than the heterosexual clubs are selling death.
They don't give a damn about it, apparently, because it's going on, and they're making money.
And no gay man in this city wants to die, nor does he want his friends and lovers to die.
People were dropping left, right, and center. It wasn't just gay people.
It's not only homosexual clubs that are affected by these new regulations. Heterosexual sex clubs are also being targeted.
We permit people to have sex if they so desire here.
Anal intercourse and fellatio here?
We never had a situation where we had to make a rule on something like that.
Over time, we started to see who was dying and why. Are they straight? Were they gay? Were they doing drugs? Were they wearing protection? Were they not wearing protection?
There's a new HIV infection every single minute. There's a new AIDS death every half hour.
There are an estimated 200,000 people in New York City today who shoot drugs. The majority of them, according to experts, share their needles. And that majority, they say, is not only shooting heroin or cocaine, but also AIDS.
The community was torn between grief and terror and rage that no one was doing anything about it.
It became a real political problem for Mayor Koch because he's getting a lot of pressure from the gay community to do more.
You're spending half your time at hospitals, visiting, or at funerals. And there was a hopelessness and, you know, why isn't anyone helping us? It wasn't until ACT UP formed in '87 that you could focus all of those emotions.
Protesters denounced Ed Koch in a bitter demonstration over AIDS.
An army of 2,500 protesters was mobilized by ACT UP, a coalition of gay groups. And their target was a man who's long expressed sympathy for their community, Mayor Edward Koch.
We're letting Koch know that we're not going to tolerate his killing New York City.
Police department, you are currently in violation of the law.
We're dying. The city is dying.
We're willing to discuss with them where they think we can do more. We'll look at any proposal they have. It all has to be within our fiscal means.
People with AIDS live in the streets in New York City, and that's the policy of this administration. It's not a mistake.
We who are proud of being gay are sick to death of being made victims by those who are ashamed of being gay.
For Koch, there's a lot of countervailing pressure not to devote any resources. To devote any meaningful resources or to put any real energy behind the effort to combat AIDS would have just played into his critics. For Koch, it was no secret that he was rumored to be closeted homosexual himself.
This has nothing to do with sexual orientation, with what you do in your home.
Koch had years to do something, to do more. and really did nothing. I mean, it's one of the most shameful aspects of Koch's legacy. Koch really fails.
The glitz and glamour were fading, and the fun had turned into fear. The fantasy was coming to an end. A rot was setting in across New York, and perhaps no place was as compromised as Wall Street. A stunning arrest had left traders with dark secrets of their own scrambling to keep up appearances. But one financial wizard knew the game was almost up, and he'd play his final hand in a bid to save himself.
Boesky's lawyers said, "You're guilty, and your only hope is to cooperate and get some lenience." Boesky agreed to act as an undercover agent on behalf of the government.
Making a deal with Boesky was going to allow Giuliani to bring down Michael Milken.
Michael Milken was a huge bargaining chip for Boesky. It wasn't just a big fish. He was the biggest fish.
Mike Milken is only 42 years old, and yet in 1986, Manhattan Inc. magazine said he may have earned over $200 million.
This is how big Mike Milken was. If he wrote a letter saying he could finance a very big deal, maybe a couple of $1 billion, that letter was like money to Wall Street. Nobody doubted it.
Milken has raised millions by selling high-interest, high-risk junk bonds to take over companies, including $600 million for a deal involving Ivan Boesky.
If you were Ivan, the most important person in the world is Michael Milken. The takeover era, none of it happens without Michael Milken. He is the Wizard of Oz that makes it all possible. He creates the sea that Ivan Boesky swims in.
Milken had a lot of information about deals because people would come to him to finance their bids for other companies.
Part of this relationship was Milken would tell Boesky that he wanted him to take positions in various companies. If Boesky did it, none of this was disclosed. Milken would get half, Boesky would get half. That's illegal. Boesky was a foot soldier compared to Michael Milken, the general, who orchestrated takeover after takeover. And they developed this relationship where eventually Milken raised $1 billion in capital for Boesky.
Michael Milken was the kingfish, and if he could bring the kingfish down, why wouldn't they give him a deal?
Ivan Boesky was over. He was doomed. And so he agreed to cooperate with the government and wear a wire and meet with Michael Milken. So he went out to Los Angeles and set up a meeting. Where else? Well, Ivan Boesky's hotel, the Beverly Hills Hotel.
When Mr. Boesky was outfitted with a wire, the agent who was assigned to the case gave him a T-shirt for him to wear, to which the wire would be attached. This was problematic because Mr. Boesky was known to break out in a rash if any material worth less than $600 touched his skin. Nonetheless, he put the T-shirt on and wore the wire.
The drama of that meeting, where Boesky knew he was recording the most important man in American finance and was in the course of implicating him, somebody must have been sweating in that room. Maybe they both were. It didn't start as well as Boesky might have been hoping for. It wasn't like Milken stepped right up and, helped himself to a fruit plate and then started saying, "Oh, right, Ivan, remember when we did this, this, and this, and what are we going to do about it?" But then Boesky brought up a $5.3 million payment.
At some point in their business relationship, there was a demand for a payment by Mr. Milken of $5.3 million.
And Milken didn't say, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about," or "Where did that come from?" He knew about the $5.3 million payment. Boesky said something like, "I think I still owe you more money on that. How should I pay you?"
That was as close as there was to what in common verbiage would be called a smoking gun.
Michael Milken was doomed.
on this Columbus Day, the man leading the parade as Grand Marshal was Rudolph Giuliani. If he is a hero to Americans of Italian descent, it may be because he has attained the prestigious position of United States Attorney. It may be because he has come to be regarded as the most dynamic crime buster since the days of Thomas Dewey in New York City. Or it may be because he has jailed the heads of 4 of the 5 mafia families in New York.
Once Gotti killed Paul Castellano, obviously he became public enemy #1.
The focus is on John and his power. He made himself the target because he was the boss.
And it just created a sort of a frenzy within law enforcement to try and make a case on him.
It's something that we have to go after right now. We got to go get Gotti. We got to go get Gotti.
A celebrity godfather unlike anything the world had ever seen before.
He looked the part like a rock star.
He's living the life.
The more famous he got, the more the public seemed to forget how ruthless he was.
Whenever I see him walking, he always has a marvelous smile on his face. In fact, I admire the way he dresses.
And the feds were growing increasingly frustrated.
John fancied himself to be a mobster's mobster. It was important for him to show everyone he was not just the toughest as far as fiercest, but he was an invincible boss. He just didn't want to cross him.
Earlier this year, Romuald Picek, a refrigeration mechanic, accused Gotti and an associate of beating and robbing him in a dispute over a double-parked car.
I mean, that's just typical John. Commands power over hundreds of ruthless people, and he gets into a parking dispute with a guy and gets out of the car and smacks him. You don't know who I am? And the guy really didn't know who he was.
When the victim, Romuald Picek, learned who Gotti was, he suddenly couldn't remember who hit him.
Romuald Picek knew not to be in court pointing his finger at the boss of the Gambino crime family.
He all of a sudden got amnesia.
He wouldn't testify. He knew nothing.
And it became known as the I for Gotti case. John Gotti walked out of court a free man.
I know you didn't believe I was guilty, Ed.
Because he was so respected and feared, he had a banner that you can't touch him. So he was doing whatever he wants.
The law enforcement officials decided we definitely have to figure out a way to stop him.
The Eastern District started their own case on John Gotti, based on historical RICO, some old hijackings, some other stuff.
So John Gotti was charged with murder, with being involved in several racketeering activities along the way, including loan sharking, gambling.
It's alleged that Gotti operated out of the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club. From there, he led his men in a number of criminal activities, including extortion, racketeering, and murder.
The expectation really was from the squad he was going to get convicted.
When he showed up at the courthouse, there were more news reporters and cameras there than had ever been there before, I think.
Mr. Gotti, are you concerned about the trial details?
He had a smile on his face, and when he was asked,
Are you new to the head? How about the Gambino family?
you know, about being the boss of the crime family, he said, I'm the boss of my wife and kids at home.
This is how brazen this guy was. At his own trial in a break, he singles me out in the back of the room and, hey, who are you? So I told him who I was. I said, yeah, you know, I work on the Gambino squad with Bruce Mal. He said, oh, well, you go back and tell Bruce I'm going home. I said, all right, I'll deliver the message. I'll tell you what. You go home, I'll come and congratulate you.
Do you know what was meant by that? Do you know what was in Mr. Gotti's mind when he said that?
Yes, sir.
You read his mind?
I think it's fairly obvious.
Do you know what's in his mind now, Investigator Wright?
No, sir, I do not.
Take a look at him and tell me what he's thinking about.
I wish I knew.
Bruce Cutler was John Gotti's attorney. He was an outspoken, in-your-face defense lawyer. At John Gotti's trial, he picked up the indictment and slammed it into the wastepaper basket and said it was garbage.
In a New York courtroom today, there was elation and shock. John Gotti was acquitted by a jury on all counts of conspiracy and racketeering. The trial lasted half a year.
Witnesses allege that when the verdict was read, Gotti smirked and shouted at prosecutors, shame on them.
It was a stunning victory for him and a stunning defeat for the government.
My partner and I, the day of his acquittal, just go right to the Queens Club. That's where this guy's going. We see John, and I jump out of the car, and I walk up and said, all right, I don't know if you remember me. I'm George Gabriel. I told you I'd come and congratulate you if you won. Congratulations, I'll be seeing you. Thank God they weren't armed because John probably thought he was getting hit.
As it turned out, however, it was a bogus acquittal. The jury had been bought and paid for.
One of the jurors agreed on a price of $60,000, which they gave to him, and he was a holdout during the trial, and he's one reason why they got an acquittal.
During jury deliberations, the juror convinced the jury that John Gotti was not guilty of the crimes that he was accused of.
By the time he gets acquitted from that trial, he's becoming this folk hero even to the mob. The government can't get him. People are now even more fearful of the mob because, God, you can't even put this guy in jail. Everyone knows he killed the boss. He's doing all this stuff. You can't touch him.
The guy against whom charges could not and would not stick.
You'll never get this guy. He's untouchable.
In New York today, they're calling John Gotti the Teflon Don.
But it wasn't just law enforcement who had a score to settle with this mob star. He'd broken the rules of La Cosa Nostra by killing the boss. And now the families wanted blood.
The Genovese family and the Lucchese family were really upset because they liked Paul Castellano and he's a traditional boss. There was no reason to kill him.
Killing the boss is like the cardinal rule. You just don't go and do that. That was nuts.
The Lucchese and Genovese crime families decided that Gotti had violated the rules and was deserving of death for having killed his boss.
Police in New York City are worried about a mob war this morning after an apparent gangland killing Sunday in Brooklyn. A car bomb killed one man, reportedly a lieutenant in one of the country's most powerful mafia families.
A bomb was planted under a car that Gotti was expected to be driving after a meeting at a social club in Brooklyn.
They planted the bomb right under John's car.
Fortunately for John Gotti, he decided not to go to that social club when Frank DeChico and someone who looked like John Gotti got into the car. Button was pushed. The car blew up.
DeChico was blown to bits a short time later. Police believe his death was arranged by older members of the Gambino family who were still angry about Castellano's murder. Gotti was clearly in trouble. He was in trouble with Castellano's loyalists, and he was in trouble with the law.
John Gotti escaped for the moment.
New York, in all its greedy, seedy glory, had reached its tipping point.
We're dying.
The signs were everywhere if you knew where to look. It was a powder keg waiting to explode. And one of Wall Street's richest men would be the spark that lit the fuse.
November 14th, 1986. The SEC announced a press conference.
After the stock markets closed, the SEC announced the biggest crackdown ever in an insider trading case. Ivan Boesky admitted that he had cashed in on insider information which was not available to the public.
The SEC put out a press release saying that Ivan Boesky had been charged with insider trading. That became known as Boesky Day.
Boesky said he would plead guilty and would cooperate with federal authorities in a widening investigation of insider trading, which experts believe could involve other prominent Wall Street figures.
The rotten apple theory that applied to Dennis Levine was a defense that was crumbling. The barrel had some problems and some rot in it.
When all of a sudden Ivan became truly Ivan the Terrible, when that headline ripped across the street, I think true paranoia really set in that everybody could be exposed because he touched so much of Wall Street.
To try to win leniency for himself, Boesky cooperated with federal officials in secretly taping telephone conversations with other Wall Street operators.
I remember when that news struck, it was like all the air went out of the room. He dealt with everyone.
For those who dealt and spoke with Boesky, now a period of anxious waiting.
All over Wall Street, they're practically jumping out windows.
Paranoia ran rampant. It was like everybody on Wall Street was suddenly thinking, oh my God, did I ever talk to Ivan Boesky? What did I say? What did he say? And of course, there were some people who realized they were in trouble.
As one former SEC official put it, this is like arresting the madam of a brothel and finding her private book of clients.
Boesky Day was a deep and profound shock to the system. And because of the nebulous nature of insider trading, the fact that you may just be trading on a tip and not know that it came from illegal information. You know, that's a legitimate fear. If I traded on a bunch of tips in 1987 and I suddenly learned that my cousin's cousin knew Ivan Boesky, I'm worried. Is Boesky naming me?
That further disclosures resulting from the Boesky affair may weaken public confidence in financial markets.
And that fear had an impact on the stock market.
In addition to stunning the financial world, the Ivan Boesky affair has had an immediate effect on takeover stocks as the SEC continues its big chill against insider trading.
Wall Street is based on psychology. People are guessing, and if suddenly the guessing turns dark and you say, oh my God, more people are going to get indicted on insider trading, panic sets in and people start abandoning stocks. And you abandon stocks, the stock market drops.
The market was off more than 40 points.
Small investors checking on their stocks during their lunch hour blamed Boesky.
It's not fair. Looks like if you got money, you can do whatever you want.
I don't think it's fair for someone to really know so much before I do.
Small investors have a right to believe that our markets are honest, that they are not being manipulated, that there are no Boeskys out there.
It's incredibly important that the market function in a way that's as fair as possible and that people believe that it's functioning in a way that's as fair as possible.
For every dollar of profit that's made by an Ivan Boesky who breaks the rules, there's a dollar that's lost by somebody else in the market.
Millions of Americans depend on the stock market for financial security, for retirement. If people begin to think that the game is rigged, then the stock market as we know it is over.
Unless you're an inside member of this inside club, you cannot make money.
Ivan Boesky was a really big deal. It was a signal moment in modern American history, both because of the gaudy displays of wealth, because of the financial overreach, because of the crimes.
Boesky's troubles may not end with a $100 million repayment of profits and penalties. Boesky has agreed to plead guilty to a criminal charge. The maximum sentence is 5 years.
If he's guilty as charged, then if we had capital punishment for white-collar crimes, I'd say he'd be a prime candidate.
Wall Street's biggest enigma had been exposed, and the repercussions would be far-reaching.
The hangover is economic, the hangover is cultural, the hangover is political, but most disturbing of all, the hangover is moral. We start seeing that behind many of these great fortunes in the 1980s is the old cliche, a great crime.